Alright everybody, welcome to this little video. I'm going to transfer this small illustration to that big canvas over there. I thought this would be a good opportunity to show you 5 different ways to transfer an image. You can scale it up, you can scale it down, transfer it at original size. Here's a list of all the things I'll be covering. I've provided timestamps so it'll be easy for you to jump ahead if you want to look at a specific process. As I've said, this video is not just about enlarging art, and it is packed with info. Having said that, I am not an expert, but I have tried all of these things and I wanted to share what I've learned. So hopefully you'll get something out of it. All right, let's start with the classic grid. This is also known as squaring, and this one is about as old school as it can get. It was actually used by the Egyptians 5,000 years ago. It's a very simple technique, and it, in my mind, is a go-to for most artists when transferring images from one surface to another. This method can be used to scale your subject up, scale it down, transfer it at original size. It's pretty basic as far as materials needed. You just need pencil, paper, and ruler. If you're scaling the image up, the squares on the drawing surface will be larger than on your original work. And if you're scaling down, they'll be smaller. And if you're transferring them at the same size, they'll obviously be the same size. In this example here, I've marked off a 10 by 10 grid over my original artwork and a 10 by 10 grid over my working surface. As long as you have the same number of squares on both images, you're good to go. In this case, on the smaller grid, it is made up of 100 squares measuring approximately 3/4 of an inch each. In the larger image, the individual squares are 1.5 inches each, so I'm basically doubling the size of the drawing. And you'll see in the end, the original artwork is roughly 7.5 inches wide, and the larger one will end up around 15 inches. Once you have your grids in place, you simply copy the contents of each square from the original image to the corresponding square in the reproduction. Pretty straightforward. A few tips that I've recently learned. I should have thought of this at some point along the way, but you can subdivide the individual squares in areas of your drawing that may have a lot of detail, or you might think need more points of reference. And the grid lines do tend to smear as you work on your art. So most of the time I end up painting over the drawing anyway, so that's not an issue. But if you're working in another medium like pen and ink, you might want to make your lines light with a hard pencil, and definitely plan on erasing your grid. Also on larger surfaces, I find myself quite often having to count rows and columns to find my place. It's not that big of a deal, but referencing your location on your drawing can be a little tricky. It's just something to know, especially when comparing it to other methods like the Doodle Grid, which we'll talk about later. This great little tool is called a proportional divider. It's also known as a scale divider or a reduction compass. Like the classic grid, it's been around since ancient times. This is essentially a measurement device used to transfer measurements from one surface to another. You can transfer images at the same size, increase or reduce the size of the images while keeping the proportions intact. Materials are pretty basic: paper, pencil, and a scale divider. And these are fairly inexpensive. I think I picked up mine for less than 10 bucks. So a key component to the scale divider is the adjustable pivot point. In this model, when the pivot point is placed near the center of the tool, the measurements on either side of the divider are identical. The further you move the pivot point toward the edge of the tool, the larger the size ratio becomes. So I'm going to be using the small side of this tool to measure the original photo here, and the large side of the tool to draw on my first drawing on the paper. So therefore I will be enlarging the image. I'm going to flip the tool later and repeat the process so that I'm transferring the image at a smaller size. The tool is not that practical for larger works like murals. So because there's a limitation on how much the tool can expand. But where I find the tool really great and useful is using it when drawing from real life. So it's a great tool to get the correct proportions when you're drawing a portrait for a sitting model or a still life or a landscape outdoors. So here I am using the scale divider just to measure my subject and transfer it to my sketchbook. Um, I'm just observing the elements I want to draw and trying to find different points of reference that I can easily measure and plot out on my drawing. So it's key to remember to always keep your arm extended when you're working this way. You'll sometimes see artists holding a pencil out with their arm extended, and they're essentially doing the same thing. They're just trying to take measurements um, as best they can. But if you don't keep your arm extended, your measurements will be inconsistent. So in this example here, I'm using the tool way more than I normally would. Usually I just measure a few key elements and then freehand the rest. Projectors. For this method to work, you obviously need a projector. This doesn't have to be super expensive. The projector I use is called an autograph tracer. No one has sponsored this video, by the way. You can pick one of these up for under $100. I don't think a cheaper projector like this is suitable for murals, outdoor work, or anything like that. But for small signs and canvases and works on paper, it works great. I don't have a ton of experience with more expensive projectors, so there's probably more info out there, and you'll certainly get better results as your equipment improves. In my opinion, it's definitely not worth the investment to use one of these for transferring at an original size. There's other methods, obviously, to do that. Now, with the projectors that I have used, I think there are several notable limitations and things you need to consider. First of all, you're going to need power. So you'll need an electrical outlet, an extension cord to make sure that you can turn the projector on. Second, you're going to need a wall or a vertical space to project onto. Third, it needs to be dark. You can't really use this in a light room during the day. So you're going to need to have curtains or do it at night, etc. And the fourth is you can only go so big with the image before it fades. So meaning you need to move farther and farther away from your wall to make the image larger. And as you do that, the image will fade. So there's a little bit of back and forth there. In my case, with this projector, you need a very small version of your original image. The image window on this projector is 5 inches by 5 inches. You'll also need a level place to put the projector, and getting the artwork aligned correctly to the drawing surface can be tricky if you're transferring to a canvas or a piece of paper on a wall, especially. If you bump the projector or the canvas or paper moves in any way, you're going to have to realign the image, and that is a pain. Having said that, for certain applications, these work great. So here's an example where I used a projector to transfer a small sketch to a metal sign for an outdoor community art project, and it worked great. And I've also used them to paint simple indoor murals like this one here. Moving forward, transfer paper. This is a great way to get really accurate results. It's essentially tracing. With this, you can transfer images at original size, reduce them or enlarge them, as you would imagine. This method does require having some transfer paper. I use a brand called Saral. You'll obviously need paper and pencil and tape and some scissors. If you're scaling your artwork up, you will also likely need a printer and software that lets you tile your printouts. I use Adobe Photoshop and or Adobe Illustrator. I will say this too, depending on your printer, the software, and your technical knowledge, it can get a little tricky when messing with printer output settings. In order to get the image borders to line up correctly, sometimes you have to mess around with that a little bit, just putting it out there. Other than that, it's very straightforward. You layer your transfer paper with the transfer side down onto your drawing surface. You definitely want to test this out to make sure you have the right side down. Otherwise, you'll be wasting your time because it only works one way. And then you tape your transfer paper and printouts together over your drawing surface and simply trace. Again, note that the transfer lines will smear, similar to pencils, so when painting, I usually brush a thin tone or wash over the lines to seal them in place and prevent smearing. And I use this method basically when I'm doing something intricate. Alrighty then, last but not least, the Doodle Grid. So I've used this method a few times now, and I absolutely love it. I'm not sure who started using this first, but a lot of mural artists are using it these days. There's really no limits on this one as far as size. You can transfer your image smaller, larger, same size, whatever. You'll need something to draw or paint with, and obviously a surface to paint on. The cool part about this one is to start out, you just draw a bunch of random images, symbols, squiggles, letters, numbers, whatever. And what I like about this over the classic grid is that there's no measuring involved. There's no need to be perfect with your lines. Um, you just draw a bunch of random stuff. And that's kind of fun, right? It's actually kind of fun to play around with that. It kind of gets your imagination going. I think it's really cool. It works great for painting on canvases and murals because you'll end up painting over all the doodles anyway. This method does require a smartphone, a tablet, a computer, or some sort of device. So once your doodles are done, you simply take a picture of that and you're going to superimpose that over your original artwork that you want to replicate. And I use Adobe Draw or Procreate on an iPad, but there's also free apps like Adobe Photoshop Mix. And once you have your two images in the app of your choice, you just play with the transparency levels of each image so that you can see both images simultaneously. The other awesome thing in this method is that um, you can easily scan the image and quickly pick out reference points to place your drawing. So you're not having to count rows or columns or find your way. You can just easily say, oh, this bird needs to go over here by the smiley face, etc. The other thing I want to mention is in this example here, I wasn't trying to be perfect. I didn't need to be super accurate. I'm an abstract painter at heart. That's pretty much what I do. So I just wanted to get a general placement of the birds and get them blocked in on the larger canvas. I'll end up getting crazy with colors and textures and really building up the paint later on. So, that's for another video. I have a bonus method I want to share with you. And for this one, all you really need is a pencil and a piece of paper. It's called freehand. Good old freehand drawing. So this method is, something that takes a lot of practice to build up the skill. It can be difficult. Most artists do learn how to do this over time. For me, I'm not always trying to draw realistically, so drawing freehand is actually sort of preferred for me in a way because I like to allow for a little bit of mistakes and distortion and randomness. It gives abstract paintings more interesting results sometimes. I highly encourage young artists, especially, but artists of all experience. If you haven't tried out some of these methods, give them a try. There's no substitute for experience. And if you're trying to transfer, enlarge, or reduce an image for the first time, I really hope this video is helpful and it gives you a solid overview and an understanding of your options. If you do like this video, I hope I've earned a thumbs up or maybe even a subscription. If you actually made it this far, let me know what you thought and what kinds of art-related videos you'd like to see in the future. And until the next time, peace.